White House even. Labor Secretary Alexander Acosta is defending his decision to negotiate a plea deal with convicted financier Jeffrey Epstein in that 2008 case in Florida that allowed Epstein to serve a shorter sentence on state charges of prostitution. Many are convinced, though, that the sex offender got off way too easy. Mona Kosar Abdi has more.
For nearly an hour, Labor Secretary Alex Acosta gave his account of the events that led to a lenient plea deal that he helped broker, which granted disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein immunity.
We were trying to do the right thing for these victims.
Acosta, a U.S. attorney in Florida at the time, noted the 2008 case began at the state level. Court documents show more than 30 women had accused Epstein of sexually abusing them as teenagers. And Acosta says from the start, state prosecutors mishandled the prosecution.
Simply put, the Palm Beach State Attorney's Office was ready to let Epstein walk free. No jail time. Nothing.
That is, Acosta says, until his office intervened, negotiating a new deal.
Epstein got an ultimatum. Plead guilty to a charge that would require jail time and registration, or face federal charges.
Under the federal deal, Epstein served only 13 months of an 18-month sentence, registered as a sex offender, but avoided federal charges. But one thing that was notably missing from Acosta's explanation of the case, an apology to the victims. The former state attorney at the time says Acosta abandoned a 53-page federal indictment after secret negotiations between Mr. Epstein's lawyers. Calls for Acosta's resignation came after Epstein was indicted this week by federal prosecutors in New York on new sex crime charges. The news conference failing to curb those demands.
Nothing in Secretary Acosta's attempt to justify his misconduct changes the verdict. He must go. He must resign.
Well, our Dan Raviv is still with us from Washington, but let's bring into the conversation from New York, Vinoo Varghese. He's a criminal defense attorney and a former prosecutor. So let's ask you, Mr. Former Prosecutor, that deal with Epstein, Acosta says that was the best deal that the prosecution could have reached. Do you agree with that?
The only way to know for sure is to know what the evidence was at the time, and there's no reason to disbelieve Labor Secretary Acosta.
I'm sorry, Vinoo, go on.
Can you hear me? Okay. There's no reason to disbelieve Acosta on this situation. You got to understand that when these guys make deals, there's often reasons for them, right? And if there's so much overwhelming evidence against them, I don't believe Jeff Epstein would have gotten such a light deal. And Acosta's press conference yesterday was actually telling. For me, looking at him, having worked, in a government office, it actually had the ring of truth, which was that there were a lot of variables here, and they believed that this was the best deal that they could get. So I actually don't disbelieve him when he's saying that, and I think that all this controversy is really more political than anything else. Because if you look at the legal aspects of this case, there are a lot of issues with this case, and why the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York is bringing charges for which that were dealt with at the federal level in Florida. And I think his lawyers have a lot to explore here.
All right, well, I want to go back to Dan Raviv on that political question. We saw the Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal talking about the dissatisfaction there with Acosta's explanation. How much political danger is Acosta in at this point for losing, for example, his cabinet seat?
Senator Blumenthal is not just a Democrat, by the way. He's a former prosecutor, so he was commenting on that aspect of it. But when we hear from some other Democrats that they really want Acosta out of the Trump cabinet, do they really care who's the labor secretary? Or are they just trying to give the Trump administration some trouble? I think there is, a political goal in that. But I have to say, the impression when you talk to people about the case is that Jeffrey Epstein absolutely was let off easy a dozen years ago in that Florida deal. And so many people are really happy. But now that we hear even more evidence, more women who've grown up, they were teenagers at the time, and they say they were abused. In at least one case, a woman says she was raped by Epstein when she was 15. Most people seem to say, good, Epstein will be on trial again. He should be punished more. By the way, Epstein's lawyers in court today are suggesting bail, that he should be allowed out to stay in his mansion in New York City, and they're putting up, in effect, $77 million bail by putting up the value of the mansion itself. Kalev.
Well, you mentioned that other victim that came forward. Let's just hear briefly from her what she had to say.
He, very forcefully, kind of brought me to the table, and I just did what he told me to do. I was really scared. I didn't necessarily think that he was, going to rape me.
Did he hold you there?
Yeah.
No question in your mind. He knew you did not want that to happen.
Oh, yeah. No, he definitely, yeah. There was no way. I was like, I don't want to say I was screaming or anything of that nature, but I was terrified, and I was telling him to stop. I just thought, it's my fault. I was obligated. That's just what you're supposed to do. So I really did not know better.
When did you stop blaming yourself?
It was a long time, really.
Well, certainly disturbing allegation there. Vinoo, was that something the prosecutors would likely to add on in their case against Epstein?
Well, it depends. I mean, look, that woman has filed a civil suit in New York State court against Epstein. So one of the things that's really concerning here, and again, I'm not Jeff Epstein's lawyer, but what's really concerning here is that this matter was dealt with at the federal level back in 2008, and the federal government decided not to go forward. Now, 10 years later, because of public pressure and because of the reporting of the newspaper, the Miami Herald, all of this is a reaction to that. And at the press conference on Monday, when the U.S. Attorney in New York, Jeffrey Berman, also somebody who's very close to President Trump, by the way, Berman had to recuse himself on the Michael Cohen case. So it's interesting here that he didn't recuse himself on this case involving another Trump friend. But Jeff Berman went out and said, if there are other people here, come forward. Well, that's dangerous now. You're asking people to come forward, and some of these people may or may not have had any contact with Epstein. We know that Epstein was convicted of solicitation of a minor involving prostitution back in Florida. That's what he's convicted of. So there is actually one victim that we know of. Everyone else is an accuser, a complainant, which is a legal term for somebody in this situation, or at best, an alleged victim. So these allegations, this has been known for a while. The reporting on this was released several months ago. And, just a few weeks ago, the appellate court overlooking New York, federal appellate court, agreed to release all this evidence relating to Epstein. So now people are going to be jumping out. She will not be the last person who comes forward.
No, obviously not. I want to ask you, there have been suggestions of perhaps Epstein offering or asking for a plea deal, giving other information on some big names that may be connected to this case. Would a plea deal be likely in this kind of case?
Hey, you don't know how this is going to develop, and the same issues that Labor Secretary Acosta, former U.S. Attorney Acosta, talked about will be the same issues here for New York prosecutors, New York federal prosecutors. And you add another decade on top of that, well, there's a reason that there's statute of limitations on most crimes. Now, on what he's charged with in New York, there is no statute of limitations, but there should be. Why? Because it also protects real victims. Because how are you going to prove this case a decade later? Where's the trail? Where is all of this evidence, against it? But in terms of a plea deal, so getting back whether there's going to be a plea deal, well, you're going to see what the discovery is, and you're going to see what the government can actually prove. Right. So if the defense lawyers think that the case against them can be proven, then maybe Epstein has information on other people that the government will go after.
Okay. Vinoo Varghese in New York, Dan Raviv in Washington. Thanks for joining us.